Welcome to a deep dive all about learning. You know how to make it really happen, what actually works, and how to ditch all those myths holding you back. Our guide for this journey is John Hattie's Visible Learning for Teachers.
Yes.
This book isn't just another theory. It's built on over 900 meta-analyses covering millions of students. Talk about serious data.
Yeah, that's some serious data. We're diving into the insights from a truly massive research project. What I think is so amazing about this research is how applicable it is to you, wherever you are in your learning journey. Today, we'll uncover what really makes a difference in learning, not just for students in classrooms, but for anyone who wants to learn more effectively.
You've probably heard that the teacher is the biggest factor in a student's success. But what does that really mean? It's not about praising or blaming individuals. Hattie's research points to a specific mindset that makes all the difference.
It's about the teacher seeing themselves as an evaluator of their own impact. Imagine a teacher constantly asking, is what I'm doing actually moving the needle for my students?
Yeah.
They're looking at data, student feedback, and their own methods with a critical eye. That shifting perspective, that's what Hattie calls being a change agent.
And this mindset is crucial because it busts some of the common myths we've all heard about learning. Take learning styles, for example. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Seems logical, right? Cater to how someone supposedly learns best. And boom, success.
Well, the research actually doesn't back that up. Hattie's work, along with many other studies, has found no evidence that tailoring teaching to these learning styles makes any real difference.
Okay, so instead of getting bogged down in those sorts of ideas, what should we be focusing on?
Well, Hattie's research dives into that with a concept called effect sizes.
Effect sizes.
It sounds technical, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It's a way to measure how much different factors actually impact learning. Think of it like ranking what moves the needle the most in terms of achievement. And some of these rankings are quite surprising, for instance. You'd think reducing class size would be a big win. More individual attention, right?
Yeah, seems like a no-brainer. Smaller classes, more learning.
But the effect is actually pretty small. It turns out pouring tons of money into smaller classes may not be the best use of resources. The effect size is only 0.21, which is far less than other strategies we'll be talking about.
Wow. So what does have a massive impact? One of the most surprising findings was that self-reported grades had a huge effect size, a whopping 1.44. That means students are incredibly good at predicting their own success. That blew my mind. Why do you think that is?
It's a fascinating insight into the power of self-belief. It's not just that students know where they stand, it's that their belief in their abilities can actually drive their success. If you believe you can achieve something, you're much more likely to put in the effort and persevere through challenges. It all comes back to that growth mindset.
That's such an important takeaway for anyone trying to learn right. Your belief in yourself actually plays a massive role. But self-belief isn't the whole story. What are some of the other high-impact factors Hattie uncovered?
Well, right up there with self-reported grades are things we often take for granted. The quality of teacher-student relationships and the power of feedback. They have effect sizes of 0.72 and 0.75, respectively.
Okay, let's unpack WHY. Those two things have such a big impact. We all know that feeling of connecting with a teacher who believes in you, right? But how does that actually translate into better learning?
It goes deeper than just feeling good. When there's mutual respect and a sense of trust, you're more likely to take risks in your learning. You ask questions without fear. You're willing to try new things. And you push yourself beyond your comfort zone.
And when it comes to feedback, we're not just talking about grades or a good job sticker.
Exactly. Effective feedback is about pinpointing strengths and areas for growth. It guides you toward what to focus on next. It helps you see the path forward, not just dwell on past mistakes. And the research shows that students are most receptive to feedback that's forward-looking, specific, and constructive.
Okay, that makes sense. But there are more surprising findings in these effect sizes. Another one that stood out to me was ability grouping. You'd think that putting students with similar abilities together would lead to better outcomes.
It seems intuitive, right? Tailor the pace and level to a more homogeneous group. But again, the research paints a different picture. Ability grouping only has an effect size of 0.12, one of the lowest impacts.
Really? So maybe sticking kids in boxes based on their current abilities isn't the best approach.
Right. And it goes back to that growth mindset idea. Every student has the potential to achieve at a high level, and grouping them based on perceived ability can actually limit their growth.
It's almost as if we're saying, you are what we perceive you to be, instead of giving them space to exceed those expectations.
That's a great way to put it. It's about fostering an environment where all students feel challenged and supported to reach their full potential.
Now, speaking of challenge, Hattie has a lot to say about how important the right kind of challenge is for learning.
Absolutely. He argues that setting appropriately challenging goals is essential for engagement and motivation. The sweet spot seems to be around tasks being 90% knowable.
So not too easy that it's boring, but not so difficult that it's discouraging. What happens when you hit that 90% knowable mark?
That's where the magic happens. Students feel motivated, they enjoy the challenge, and they're more likely to stick with it even when things get tough. And for reading, that knowable percentage jumps even higher to 95, 99%. It seems we need a lot of familiarity to stay engaged with what we're reading.
Fascinating. This idea of challenge ties directly into another one of Hattie's big ideas. Deliberate practice. It's not just about putting in the hours, right?
Not at all. Deliberate practice is about focused, intentional effort directed toward a specific goal. It's about identifying your weaknesses and working strategically to improve them.
So it's about working smarter, not just harder. And ideally, this deliberate practice should happen within that 90% knowable zone.
Exactly. Deliberate practice is most effective when it's challenging but not overwhelming.
All right, so we've busted some myths and looked at some surprising high and low impact factors on learning. But visible learning isn't just about test scores and data right. It also dives into the student's experience.
It does. Hattie argues that student-centered learning is crucial. He talks about creating an environment where students feel warmth, trust, empathy, and positive relationships.
So it's more than just delivering information. It's about creating a space where students feel safe to explore, make mistakes, and grow. And Hattie really emphasizes the role of trust. He says you need to have the expectation that they will be able to make it through it or that what they want to learn is worth learning.
That trust is vital for both the student and the teacher. When students feel trusted, they're more likely to take ownership of their learning.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we've barely scratched the surface of what visible learning has to offer. Let's take a deeper look at what Hattie has to say about feedback and the importance of student voice in our next segment.
Sounds good. You know, one of the most valuable things I got from visible learning was a clearer picture of how learning actually happens. It's not just about absorbing facts, there's a whole journey involved.
That's a great point. I remember feeling a little lost in the book when it first mentioned surface learning and deep learning. I knew those terms get thrown around a lot, but what do they really mean?
Think of it like building a house. Surface learning is laying the foundation. You're getting the basic facts, the vocabulary, the building blocks of a subject. Deep learning is where you start constructing the walls, connecting the rooms, seeing how everything fits together.
So surface learning isn't bad. You need that foundation before you can build anything meaningful.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that learning progresses through phases. And Hattie uses this framework called the solo taxonomy to describe those levels of understanding.
Okay, break that down for us. What is solo taxonomy?
SOLO stands for Structure of Observed Learning Outcomes. It's a way to describe how a student's understanding of a concept evolves. It starts with a pre-structural level, where you have very little grasp of the idea. It moves all the way to an extended abstract level, where you can apply that knowledge to completely new situations.
So it's like climbing a ladder, with each rung representing a deeper level of understanding.
That's a great analogy. And what's interesting is that students can enter the learning process at any of these levels. What matters is that teachers understand where each student is on that ladder and then guide them to the next rung.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about assuming everyone starts at the same point or learns at the same pace.
Right. And this ties back to what we were discussing earlier about feedback. The type of feedback that's effective at one level of understanding might not be helpful at another level.
Okay, let's dive back into feedback, because I know that's something you and I are both passionate about. Hattie breaks down feedback into 4 levels, right?
He does. And understanding these levels can be game-changing, not just in the classroom, but in any learning environment. The first level is task feedback, basic information about whether you got something right or wrong.
So think of it like checking your answers in the back of the textbook.
Exactly. But the higher levels of feedback go way beyond that. Process feedback is about understanding the strategies you used, the steps you took, and how those led to your outcome.
So it's less about the final answer and more about how you got there.
Precisely. Then there's self-regulation feedback, which is all about helping you become more aware of your own thinking process. It's about developing metacognitive skills, the ability to monitor and control your own learning.
That sounds crucial for becoming a more independent learner, right?
Yeah.
Being able to assess your own progress and figure out where you need to adjust.
Absolutely. And the final level is self-feedback, which is about encouraging you to reflect on your own learning, identify your strengths and weaknesses, and set goals for improvement.
Wow. I'm realizing now that feedback is so much more than just praise or criticism. It's about guiding the learning process in a really focused way.
It is, and one of the most fascinating things Hattie discovered is that the most effective feedback is focused on the learning, not just the task. It's about helping you understand the why behind the what.
Okay, I love that distinction. So instead of saying you got this math problem wrong, you'd say something like, let's look at the steps you took. Where did your thinking go off track? What could you do differently next time?
That's a great example. It's about giving feedback that's specific, actionable, and forward-looking.
Now, all of this talk about feedback makes me think about how important it is to incorporate student voice into the learning process.
That's a key theme in visible learning. Hattie argues that students have valuable insights into their own learning, and that their feedback can be a powerful tool for improvement.
And he suggests that student evaluations of teachers can be really valuable for helping teachers reflect on their practice and identify areas where they can grow.
Right. He believes that giving students a voice in the learning process increases their ownership and motivation. It's about moving away from a top-down approach and creating a more collaborative learning environment.
I love that. Now, before we go any further, there's a concept in the book that I want to unpack, the idea of a student's catalyst for learning.
That's an intriguing one. It's about understanding what drives a student to engage with the material, what sparks their curiosity and motivation.
Hattie argues that a key driver is seeing a gap between where they are now and where they want to be. It's recognizing that there's something they don't know or a skill they haven't mastered, and then being motivated to close that gap.
And this is where learning strategies become so important. Once a student has identified that gap, they need the tools to bridge it.
So what are some of the most effective learning strategies that Hattie highlights?
There's a wide range, but some of the most powerful ones include goal setting, self-monitoring, concentration, and of course deliberate practice, which we discussed earlier.
I'm seeing a theme here. A lot of this comes back to students taking ownership of their learning, becoming more metacognitive, and developing that self-regulation.
Absolutely. And Hattie also emphasizes the importance of helping students understand their competence as they progress through their learning.
And I remember being a little confused by that phrase when I first read it. Can you elaborate on what that means?
He describes a learning continuum that goes from novice to capable to proficient. It's about helping students develop a realistic understanding of their own abilities and how they're progressing along that continuum.
So it's not just about being good or bad at something. It's about recognizing where you are on that journey of mastery and then focusing on taking those next steps.
Exactly. And the teacher's role is to guide students along that journey, helping them identify their strengths, areas for improvement, and celebrate their progress.
And this ties back to the importance of feedback. Providing students with clear and specific feedback on their progress helps them develop that accurate sense of their own competence.
It does. And it also highlights the importance of understanding the phases of learning and the solo taxonomy. Students need feedback that's appropriate for their current level of understanding.
Okay, that's making a lot more sense now. But there's one more piece of this competence puzzle that I found intriguing. Hattie mentions that sometimes students need to unlearn or even go backwards before they can move forward. What's that all about?
Think of it like having to demolish a poorly built section of a house before you can construct something stronger in its place. Sometimes students come to the classroom with preconceived notions or ineffective learning strategies that are holding them back.
So it's about helping them identify those roadblocks and then develop more effective approaches. And it seems like this would require a lot of trust between the teacher and the student. The student has to be willing to let go of those old ways of thinking and be open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And it often involves helping students shift their focus from performance to mastery.
That's such an important distinction. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. Performance motivation is all about achieving a certain outcome or grade. It's that extrinsic reward that drives some students. Mastery motivation, on the other hand, is about the intrinsic satisfaction of understanding the material, developing skills, and becoming more competent. It's about loving the learning process itself.
So it's about shifting the focus from the end goal to the journey itself.
Exactly. And Hattie's research shows that students who are motivated by mastery are more likely to persevere through challenges, embrace feedback, and ultimately achieve at a higher level.
That makes so much sense. It's about finding joy in the learning process, not just the destination. And I can see how a supportive learning environment where mistakes are seen as opportunities and feedback is focused on growth, would really nurture that mastery motivation.
Absolutely. It all comes back to creating that culture of learning that Hattie emphasizes throughout the book.
Now, before we shift our focus to the role of school leadership in fostering this culture of learning, I want to revisit the concept of feedback one more time, because it's such a powerful lever for student achievement. We've talked about the 4 levels of feedback, but there's another fascinating insight from Hattie's work that I want to share. He discovered that students actually have very specific preferences when it comes to the kind of feedback they find helpful.
That's right. It's not enough for teachers to simply offer feedback. They need to deliver it in a way that resonates with students and that they can actually use to improve.
So what did Hattie's research reveal about how students perceive feedback?
He found that students overwhelmingly want feedback that's forward-looking, specific, and constructive. They want to know what they can do to improve, not just dwell on what they did wrong.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about empowering them to move forward in their learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about framing feedback as a gift, not a punishment.
I love that framing. It's about seeing feedback as an opportunity for growth and improvement, not a judgment of their abilities.
It is, and when feedback is delivered in this way, it can be incredibly powerful in helping students learn and grow.
Now, one thing that really stood out to me in visible learning was Hattie's emphasis on the importance of errors. He actually encourages teachers to welcome errors.
That might seem counterintuitive at first, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Errors are simply opportunities to learn.
So it's about shifting the mindset from seeing errors as failures to seeing them as valuable learning experiences.
Exactly. And Hattie argues that creating a classroom climate where errors are welcomed and embraced can be incredibly powerful for student learning.
It's about fostering that sense of psychological safety, where students feel comfortable taking risks, experimenting, and learning from their mistakes.
Precisely. And this ties back to the importance of student-centered learning and building those positive relationships we were talking about earlier.
It all comes back to creating that supportive and trusting learning environment, where students feel valued, respected, and empowered to grow. It does feel like it all comes down to creating the right conditions for growth to happen. And speaking of conditions, let's talk about the whole school environment. It's easy to focus on individual teachers and students, but what about that larger system they're in?
That's where school leadership becomes crucial. Hattie's research makes it clear that school leaders, they have a massive impact on whether a school becomes a vibrant learning hub or just kind of stay stuck in the status quo.
He uses this term, instructional leader, to describe the kind of principal or administrator who really makes a difference. What exactly does an instructional leader do?
Well, they're not just managing budgets and schedules. They're deeply involved in the learning process itself. They have a strong understanding of curriculum. They can observe teachers and provide meaningful feedback. And they create an environment where teachers feel supported to experiment and grow.
So it's about fostering that culture of continuous improvement, not just for students, but for the whole staff.
Exactly. Instructional leaders are also data-driven. They're looking at assessments, observations, even school climate surveys, anything that gives them insight into what's working and what needs attention.
That sounds like a lot of data to sift through. How do they make it useful for teachers?
They have to become masters of making data accessible and actionable. Think data walls, dashboards, team meetings, anything that helps teachers understand what the data means and how they can use it to improve their practice.
But it's not just about throwing numbers at teachers. Hattie talks about school leaders needing to facilitate productive conversations around that data. What does that look like?
Imagine a principal leading a meeting where teachers feel safe to share their struggles, ask questions, and brainstorm solutions together. It's about creating a collaborative environment where data is seen as a tool for growth, not a weapon for judgment.
That feels so different from the way data is often used in schools, more like a way to measure and rank teachers, instead of helping everyone get better.
That's why the leader's role is so important. They set the tone for how data is used and discussed. And beyond data, they also need to create a shared vision for student success.
Okay. What does that look like in practice? Is it just about having a catchy mission statement on the wall?
It's much more than that. It's about everyone in the school. Teachers, administrators, support staff, being aligned on what they're working toward and how they'll get there. It's about clear communication, celebrating milestones, and reminding everyone why their work matters.
So it's about building that sense of purpose and community that we were talking about earlier, but at a school-wide level.
Right. And a key part of that is the leader's ability to build strong relationships with teachers. It's not just about being the boss, it's about being a supportive and collaborative leader.
I imagine that requires a whole different set of skills. Being a good listener, offering support and challenge, and recognizing when teachers need a boost or a nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. And just like we talked about the importance of feedback for students, it's equally crucial for teachers to receive regular and effective feedback from their leaders.
So it's about creating that culture of feedback throughout the entire school system. Leaders providing feedback to teachers, teachers providing feedback to students, and even students giving feedback to teachers.
That's right. It becomes a continuous cycle of learning and improvement. And a key part of this is recognizing and appreciating the hard work and dedication of teachers. They're the ones on the front lines, making all of this happen.
That appreciation is so important. Teaching is such a demanding job, and it's easy to feel burned out or unappreciated.
Absolutely. When teachers feel valued and supported, they're more likely to be engaged and effective in their work, and that ultimately benefits students.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final piece I want to explore. We've talked about teachers being change agents, but Hattie also emphasizes the importance of teachers being lifelong learners themselves.
That's a crucial point. Effective teachers are constantly seeking new knowledge, trying out new approaches, and reflecting on their practice. They embody that growth mindset we talked about earlier.
So it's about professional development, but not just checking off those required hours. It's about having a genuine thirst for learning and improvement.
Exactly. And that can involve reading books and articles, attending conferences, collaborating with colleagues, anything that expands their knowledge and skill set.
It makes me think that teaching, at its core, it's about modeling that love of learning for your students.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what makes Hattie's work so powerful. It reminds us that learning isn't just about memorizing facts or passing tests. It's about cultivating a mindset, embracing a process, and building a culture where growth and improvement are valued above all else.
That's a fantastic message to end on. And I hope our listeners feel empowered to take these insights from visible learning and apply them to their own learning journeys, whether they're students, teachers, or just lifelong learners like us.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving into this material with you.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And to our listeners, remember, the journey of learning never truly ends. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep growing.